What if I told you that one of the most important weapons in history was so terrifying, so disruptive, that the Church declared it hateful to God and tried to ban it from all of Christendom? But it wasn't banned for being too deadly. It was banned for being too easy. This is the story of the simple stick and string, the first machine humans ever invented to store and release energy. It's a story that didn't just win battles, it built empires, created new social classes, and its core secret is now being used to design the robots and spaceships of tomorrow. Today, we're unpacking the incredible history of the bow and crossbow. We'll uncover how it all started, who mastered it, and why its greatest rival was a weapon so simple anyone could use it. Forget the pyramids. Forget Stonehenge. The story of the bow begins more than 60,000 years ago, with bone arrow points found in a cave in South Africa. For millennia, it was humanity's superweapon, giving us a lethal advantage over prey and rivals alike. But the first true revolution in archery didn't come from a better bow. It came from putting an archer on a horse, and it created a new type of warrior that would terrorize the great empires of the world for centuries. So, how on earth did they do it? Welcome to The History Of, where we unpack the stories behind the ideas and objects that shaped our world. And the story of the bow is really the story of a technological arms race that began in the Stone Age. Shooting a bow from a moving platform is hard. Shooting a long bow from a moving platform is basically impossible. The nomadic peoples of the Eurasian steppes, the Scythians, the Huns, the Mongols faced a problem. They needed a short bow for horseback, but a short wooden bow is a weak bow. Their solution was a marvel of material science, the composite recurve bow. This wasn't just a bent stick, it was a high-tech laminate. It was born of necessity in places where you couldn't find a single perfect piece of yew wood. They used a wooden core, glued a layer of animal horn to the belly, the side facing the archer, because horn is fantastic at resisting compression. Then they glued layers of animal sinew to the back, because sinew is incredible at resisting tension. The result? A short, snappy, ridiculously powerful bow that stored far more energy than a simple wooden bow of the same size. This technology made mounted archers the most feared warriors of their age. The Parthians became so famous for shooting backward while retreating that it gave us a phrase we still use today, the Parthian shot. A devastating final blow delivered just as you leave. Centuries later, the Mongols would use this same technology to build the largest contiguous land empire in human history. An empire the size of Africa, conquered by warriors on horseback, armed with a sophisticated piece of engineering they could wield with one hand. These composite bows were engineering marvels. But at the same time, in ancient China, a completely different solution to the problem of more power was being developed. One that didn't require strength or skill, or even years of practice. And when it arrived in Europe, the knights were terrified. Around the 6th century BC, while kingdoms across China were locked in a constant, brutal struggle for survival, a new weapon appeared on the battlefield. It wasn't an evolution of the bow. It was a revolution. This was the crossbow, and its genius was its trigger mechanism. By mounting a small bow horizontally on a stock and adding a trigger, the act of holding the immense power of the drawn string was transferred from the archer's muscles to a simple mechanical lock. This changed everything. You no longer needed to be a lifelong athlete to be a deadly shot. You could take a peasant, give them a crossbow, and within weeks they could kill a knight. The Chinese understood this potential immediately. By 209 BC, the Qin army had 50,000 crossbowmen, armed with weapons featuring mass-produced bronze parts. This wasn't artisanal warfare anymore. This was the birth of the industrial army. They even invented a version that seems like something out of a video game, the repeating crossbow. Using a simple lever and a gravity-fed magazine, a single soldier could unleash a storm of bolts without reloading each one. They weren't very powerful, so the tips were often dipped in poison, but for sheer suppressive fire, nothing like it had ever been seen before. So now the stage was set. In the West, a tradition of powerful but difficult to master bows. In the East, a simple, deadly machine for the masses. When these two philosophies of war finally clashed in medieval Europe, it would lead to one of history's greatest rivalries, the longbow versus the crossbow. By the 1300s, European battlefields were dominated by two competing technologies. In one corner, the English longbow, a simple 6-foot stave of yew wood that in the right hands was a terrifying weapon. And in the other, the European crossbow, now upgraded with a powerful steel bow, or prod. On paper, the contest seems one-sided. Let's break it down. First, training. To use a war-weight longbow with a pull of over 100 pounds, you had to start as a child. Skeletons of longbowmen show they were physically deformed by their craft, with thickened arm bones and curved spines. The English crown even banned other sports on Sundays to force men to practice. The crossbow? No strength required? You could use a lever or a crank to draw the string, making it the perfect weapon for a quickly raised army. Next, rate of fire. Here, the longbow was king. A trained archer could loose 10, maybe 12 arrows a minute. The crossbowman, busy with his crank, was lucky to get off 3. But what about power? This is where the crossbow excelled. Its heavy steel prod and short, heavy bolt could punch straight through a knight's expensive plate armor. The longbow's ability to do this is heavily debated. It was more likely to find the weaker points, the joints, the visor, or the horse. And this gets to the social impact. The longbow turned English commoners, the yeomen, into a respected class of professional soldiers. But the crossbow terrified the aristocracy. It was a social leveler, a weapon that made a peasant the equal of a knight, which is exactly why the Pope tried to have it banned. On paper, the crossbow seems like the obvious winner. More power, less training. So how did an army of English farmers with longbows manage to repeatedly annihilate the flower of French knighthood, who were backed by the best crossbow mercenaries in the world? The answer lies in a muddy field in France. This is the Battle of Agincourt. King Henry V's English army of about 6,000 men, 5/6 of them longbowmen. But Henry was a brilliant tactician. He chose his ground perfectly. A narrow field flanked by woods, which meant the massive French army couldn't surround him. They would have to attack him head-on, through a muddy bottleneck. Then, his archers prepared their secret weapon, and it wasn't the bow itself. It was a forest of sharpened stakes, angled towards the enemy. A simple, brutal defense designed to impale a charging warhorse. The French, arrogant and impatient, sent their cavalry first. But the charge was a disaster. The horses, bogged down in the mud, ran straight into the wall of stakes. At the same time, the English archers unleashed hell. This is where the longbow's rate of fire became the decisive factor. It wasn't about one arrow penetrating one breastplate. It was about 5,000 archers firing 6 arrows a minute. That's 30,000 arrows darkening the sky every 60 seconds. A storm of steel-tipped wood. The arrows wounded the horses, which went mad with pain, trampling the French men-at-arms advancing behind them. The knights, exhausted from slogging through the mud in 60 pounds of armor, were packed so tightly they could barely lift their weapons. When the archers ran out of arrows, they did the unthinkable. These lightly armored commoners dropped their bows, grabbed whatever weapons they had, and charged. They swarmed the exhausted, immobilized French knights, and the battle turned into a brutal, one-sided slaughter. The English longbow hadn't won because it was a magic weapon that could punch through steel. It won because it was part of a brilliant tactical system that turned a muddy field into a killing ground. The longbow had its moment of glory, but its days were numbered. A new invention was coming, that would make both bows and the crossbows obsolete on the battlefield. But in a strange twist of fate, as these weapons vanished from war, they found a bizarre new life as a game for the rich. By the 1500s, firearms had arrived, and they were here to stay. A musket required even less training than a crossbow, hit with terrifying force, and made a very convincing noise. In 1595, the English army was officially ordered to replace all its bows with muskets. The age of the archer was over. And then, something strange happened. The very weapon that had been the symbol of the common yeoman, the weapon that had humbled the aristocracy, was adopted by their descendants as a fashionable form of recreation. Archery societies popped up, patronized by royalty. The weapon of war had become a gentleman's pastime. This new sporting life led the bow to an unexpected place, the Olympic Games, where it debuted in 1900. And in 1904, it made history. Archery became one of the very first Olympic sports to allow women to compete. A surprising legacy for a weapon forged in the hyper-masculine world of medieval warfare. And here's another surprise for you. According to the National Safety Council, archery is more than 3 times safer than golf. So next time you're choosing a hobby, remember that. From the battlefield to the country club, the bow's journey was already stranger than fiction. But its story isn't over. That ancient principle of storing energy in a bent piece of wood is now at the heart of some of the most advanced technology on and off the planet. So, what is the ultimate legacy of the bow and crossbow? It's easy to think of them as relics of the past. But the real innovation wasn't the arrow or the bolt. It was the principle. The bow was humanity's first great success in elastic potential energy. The art of slowly storing energy in a system and then releasing it in a sudden, powerful burst. And that idea is everywhere. In robotics labs, engineers are building tiny jumping robots inspired by insects. Their motors are too weak for a powerful leap, so instead, they slowly compress a spring-like leg, storing energy, just like drawing a bow, before releasing it to launch themselves incredible distances. Architects and engineers are designing tensegrity structures. They look like they're floating, with rigid bars suspended in a web of cables. They are incredibly light, flexible, and strong because they perfectly balance tension and compression, the exact same forces at work in a composite bow. They might be the key to building structures on other planets. And most amazingly, when we launch satellites into space, how do we fit a massive solar panel or antenna into a tiny rocket? We fold it, and it's often deployed using deployable composite booms, long, thin strips of flexible material that are flattened and rolled up for launch. Once in orbit, they are released, and the stored elastic energy makes them spring back into a rigid shape, unfurling the payload. It is, in essence, a bow being unstrung in the vacuum of space. From a sharpened bone in a cave 60,000 years ago to the edge of our solar system, the simple, brilliant idea of the bent stick and string is still with us, still pushing the boundaries of what's possible. It is one of the most enduring and surprising technologies in all of human history. What part of the bow's history surprised you the most? The papal ban, the horse archers, or the fact that it's helping us explore space? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories about the hidden history of the technology that surrounds us, make sure to like this video and subscribe to The History of. Thanks for watching.